our 14 gauge wire, which you'll want about two lengths of about 8 inches. And here is our XT60 female port. You'll want both a female and a male port, as when you're soldering, it'll help ensure that these pins on the inside don't move or become unusable as you're soldering. It heats up. Sometimes the plastic can melt and those can get moved, and then you're just stuck redoing it. So 8 inches of wire, male and female port for XT60. All right, so once you get your supplies ready there, go ahead and start connecting. Get the female XT60 part, that's this port right here. The other one plugs into it. And am I female? I meant male. No, get the one that it plugs into. And get your 14 gauge wire. All right. And hopefully the glare is not too much. So inside it'll have these 2 pins sticking out the top. You'll have your red hot wire going into this flat squared side into that pin, and your gray or negative wire going into the more rounded side of this connector. And you're going to want to make sure it is soldered kind of nice and smooth. It'll take a bit more solder than your other joints as these wires are so much bigger. So what you'll want to do, make sure to strip off that outer coating, expose those wires, and I would recommend heating up the wire and putting a little bit of solder in there so that it kind of wicks into the wire. And then hold it up to the cup, as this connector is a cup shape on the back of the XT60, and then proceed to heat up that metal cup while you have both connectors hooked together. That's how it'll ensure that they will always be able to connect to another port. Then you heat up the cup, apply the solder while holding your wicked wire to the cup. You might need some helping hands or some tweezers. It does get hot and a little complicated, or some putty even. Just hold that wire up against the cup, have your soldering iron kind of touching the back of the cup there, heating it up until the solder starts to melt, and apply semi-liberally until that cup gets a nice kind of concave finish in there, coating the wire. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side until both wires have a firm, solid connection. Then you can remove that the other XT60 port, as it has served its purpose. And we will then proceed to connecting it to our flight board. So once we start to connect it to the flight board, on that side that I mentioned was the front. It's opposite of where your SD card will plug in, opposite of where the micro USB port plugs in. It should be on the bottom here. So you'll want to put your capacitor in first. It's got 2 holes on either side of the flight controller. My camera's not that great, sorry. Anyways, so what I'd recommend is bending, because your capacitor will come with 2 wires, a long and a short. Yeah, so you'll bend it with the long wire. So yeah, you'll bend it with the long wire being on this positive side here with the red wire. So long wire of the capacitor. They'll start off, it's the long wire. You're going to bend them around into a hook shape like this, because they're going to go through the holes and hook back around towards the capacitor is your objective, so that it can, to the point where it can hold itself in place. Once the capacitor can hold itself in place, and you've made sure that the long wire is on the positive wire side, this red wire, long wire over here, and it's holding itself in place. Then you'll want to again strip the red wire, wick the end as we did on the XT60 side, hold it against this soldering joint, and begin to solder it to the pad. It's a fairly big pad, and you'll end up using more solder than any of these other joints. It's going to be a fairly decent sized solder, so just be prepared for that. And you'll want to get it until that is nice and kind of tight against there. Good bubble. If you need to, this would be a good time to add maybe a little extra flux before you get in there. And then you'll proceed to do the same thing on the other side. Add some flux, strip the wire, wick it. And then once these are all sealed and soldered properly, your capacitor will be in there nice and firm. Your wires, you can tug, nothing's going to happen. All the wires are completely covered and bubbled properly. And you can then get a wire cutter and trim down the cords to your capacitor as tight as you can get. We don't want them touching our board or causing us any future issues. All right, so we have finished installing our XT60 or our battery port here. Got the capacitor all soldered in there. ESCs soldered, connected to our motors. The last thing we have left, you'll need 3 of these thinner wires here. All right, there you go. 3 wires. This is going to be what connects to your receiver, which I have installed into the back. Mine here. So they'll need some moderate length here. Again, those are crazy. They just go from the front of our flight controller. If you install it where I did, that's about as far as it can get, to the back. Here, you'll just need to kind of gauge your wire accordingly. I found that about 8-10 inches gives you plenty. So that's what I'd recommend. Of the 3 colors, for like any other wire, you'll just do your positive, negative, and signal wire. So in my case, I ended up going with black, white, and yellow. And if you'd like to do the same, by all means go ahead. Yellow is going to be my signal wire. Black ground, white is going to be my positive in this case. And this is also when you're going to use your Futaba connector. Remember, we have that male Futaba connector with the female pins. All right, so since we're soldering and we still have that equipment out, go ahead, get your wires, and strip down just a tiny bit. Remember, you're stripping it down to the size of your pad. And here, remember, this is where we just installed that XT60 connector. So down opposite of this little arrow on your, get a little closer, there's a little arrow right there. Your flight controller. Opposite on that side, you're going to have 3 ports. Your S-bus port, that's the one we're primarily looking for. Your yellow wire is going to go into there. That's your signal, remember. Then your 4VS and the G port. So S-bus, they're all going to be these ones just right along the edge there. They'll go yellow, positive, negative, depending on the colors that you chose for that. Go ahead, strip and solder those right onto the board in that order, all the way across. Once you've gotten that connected into your signal, that with the yellow is the S-bus, and then, or depending on the colors you've chosen, they're secure and going to stay. You can then, or do this part first, it doesn't matter. You're going to set up and pin your wires to be inserted into the male Futaba connector. So the female ones on the male connector, and this one that I'm using, when you're looking at it, and it has this little lip on it for the Futaba connector I'm using, that's going to be the side that your signal wire is going to go into, the one that went into that you soldered onto the S-bus connector. And then positive will go in the middle, negative on the far side. There you have it. So get those pinned, insert the pins in that order, and then this will be ready to go. Just that simple. Okay, so we've made great progress, and we're coming up here to the final steps of our design. Okay, so we just finished with all the soldering electronics. Here is the receiver. I'm going to be using the Fly Sky receiver, and we're just going to go ahead and stick that to the base plate that we've been putting pretty much everything else to at this point. Where I ended up putting mine is right underneath this S500 logo, just right here on the edge between the two pylon bars that we had mentioned before. Tape the antennas to the said pylons. I use Velcro. You can use tape, glue, whatever you feel most comfortable with, as long as it's going to be secure. And we're just going to go ahead, whatever receiver you're using, go ahead and connect that up there. Just real quick before I do, just wanted to let you know, we are going, with this one, we're going to be using an S-bus. So if that's what you're using, that's what these instructions will be based upon, is using an S-bus receiver and connector. So that Futaba we made will connect right here into this S-bus one. It's on top. It's not one of the many ones on the bottom. You can tell it's got that little notch. That's the reason we used the Futaba with a notch. It makes it nice and easy and ensures that we don't get things plugged into the wrong place. So then you can go ahead, making sure that those ports right there are facing in towards the drone. It just makes it that much easier to connect your Futaba to your receiver. As I mentioned, I'm using Velcro, so I'm just going to go ahead, stick that on, and keep it get it nice and tight, and it's pretty much flush with the edge there is what I'm going for. All right. And there we go. That's taken care of. Next, you're going to be able to, if you haven't already, I know I mentioned it, go ahead and install your motor arms to the plate completely. So it'll have the spot right here where wires are going through the middle, where it has two screws. You're going to get those M3 or 2.5 screws and connect them through the bottom here. Try and get a picture for you. So right there, you're going to be, that's where one screw goes, and that's where the other one will go on the base plate, just right there on that angle of the base plate. All four will get those two screws on both corners of that angle, whereas the pylons and the hangers will connect more on these front two. So go ahead and get those arms connected.